It was supposed to be just another routine day, or so I thought. I was out of town, meeting with a client in Phoenix. The meeting had gone smoothly, and I was wrapping up some paperwork in the quiet of the conference room when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Vanessa's name. I didn't think much of it. Probably just a quick check-in. Maybe she wanted to know when I'd be home, or if I remembered to grab something on the way back. Casual, everyday stuff. I stepped into the hallway, answering with an easy, "Hey, what's up?" That's when her voice hit me. Cold, almost smug. No greeting, no small talk. Just straight to the point. "Lucas, I'm divorcing you." "Oh, and I've already sold our apartment. Jordan and I are moving in together. Good luck finding a new place." She ended it with a laugh. A damn laugh. Like she had just delivered the punchline to some inside joke. For a second, my world tilted. It felt like I was listening to someone narrate my life as if I wasn't even in it. Divorce. Jordan. Sold the apartment. Every word hit harder than the last, sharp and deliberate. But in that instant, one thing became crystal clear. I wasn't going to give her the reaction she wanted. I forced my voice to stay level, kept my tone as indifferent as I could. "Sounds good," I replied, like she had just mentioned switching her shampoo brand. Silence. Brief, but noticeable. She had expected outrage, maybe begging. Instead, I gave her nothing. But inside? Inside was a whole different story. A storm brewing, rage, disbelief, a deep, gnawing sense of betrayal. 6 years of marriage, and this was how it ended? A damn phone call, as casual as ordering takeout. Her voice echoed in my head, that sickening mix of arrogance and entitlement. "Jordan and I are moving in together." Jordan, the boyfriend I didn't even know existed until 5 seconds ago. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer, and now she was laughing about it. But the apartment, our apartment, that hit the hardest. It wasn't just a space with walls and furniture. It was everything we built together. Late-night talks, fights, laughter, plans for the future. And she tossed it all aside, like it meant nothing. I tightened my grip on the phone, taking a slow breath. She wasn't done yet. "You probably think you're going to fight this, Lucas," she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "But it's done. The paperwork is signed. Jordan and I are moving on. Maybe you should too." I didn't hesitate. "Got it," I said, still refusing to let her hear anything but calm indifference. Then I hung up. Standing in that hallway, reality started to sink in. My wife hadn't just left me. She had orchestrated this. Cold, calculated, with just enough cruelty to make sure I felt every bit of it. And I'll be honest, for a brief second, I almost had to respect the sheer audacity of it. Almost. But admiration? No. What I felt was something else entirely. Resolve. She thought she had outplayed me, thought she held all the cards. But Vanessa didn't know everything. She had no idea about the quiet little move I had made months ago when we refinanced the apartment. She didn't know that the deed, the one legal document that actually mattered, was solely in my name. And that was her first mistake. I walked back into the conference room, sat down, and stared blankly at the papers in front of me. The client meeting was still happening, but my mind wasn't there. It was back home, back in that apartment she thought she could just hand over to Jordan. The betrayal burned, but underneath it, something else had started to take shape. Determination. She wasn't going to take everything from me. She wasn't going to walk away laughing while I scrambled to pick up the pieces. No, Vanessa didn't realize it yet, but she had just handed me the upper hand. For the rest of the meeting, I kept my poker face, nodding when I needed to, saying the right things. But inside, I was already planning. By the time I walked out of that building, I wasn't the same man who had answered that phone call. I was ready. Ready to fight. Ready to show Vanessa and Jordan exactly what happens when you underestimate a man who's been paying attention all along. The flight home couldn't come soon enough. The plane ride was uneventful, but my mind was anything but calm. Every word she had said replayed in my head, hammering against the memories of our life together. The betrayal was bad enough, but the sheer arrogance of her move, selling our apartment, the one thing that had meant so much, without a second thought, was something else entirely. She had erased me from her life with the stroke of a pen. But here's the thing about Vanessa. She never read the fine print. She always skimmed through documents, signing her name with that same blind confidence she wore like a badge. The details? She left those to me. trusted me to handle them. Funny, isn't it? The very habit that used to drive me insane was now the thing saving my ass. Because when we refinanced the apartment a few months back, I made a quiet, calculated move. At the time, it was just practical. The new terms made it easier to put the deed solely in my name. It wasn't some grand scheme, just a small, logical adjustment. Vanessa barely even glanced at the papers before signing. I never brought it up because, well, why would I? It wasn't a secret, just a detail that had never mattered. Until now, she thought she had pulled off the perfect exit, thought she could sell my apartment, walk away with the money, and leave me in the dust. But what she didn't realize was that she had just tried to sell something she didn't even own. As I sat on that plane, staring out at the clouds, I couldn't help but smirk. She had no idea what was coming. When I landed and turned my phone back on, there were no messages from Vanessa, no smug follow-ups, no taunting remarks. She probably assumed I was too busy drowning in self-pity to respond. Little did she know, I was gearing up for the fight of my life. My first call wasn't to her. It was to Chloe, my lawyer and an old college friend. Years ago, I helped her move into her first apartment, and she'd always joked that if I ever needed legal help, I'd get the family discount. Well, it looked like it was time to cash in. She picked up on the second ring. Lucas, this is a surprise. You don't usually call me during work hours. What's going on? I laid it all out for her. The phone call, the apartment, Jordan. Vanessa's absurd belief that she could just erase me from the equation. By the time I finished, Chloe was silent for a moment. Then she let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She sold the apartment? She repeated, like she needed to hear it out loud to believe it. Lucas, does she even realize she legally can't do that? Apparently not, I said, a trace of amusement slipping into my voice. Chloe's tone shifted, turning serious. All right, here's what we do. First, we notify the so-called buyer that the sale is void. If Vanessa's already taken their money, that opens up a whole new can of worms. Fraud charges, for starters. The word fraud sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. Vanessa thought she had it all figured out, thought she could blindside me and walk away without consequences. But in her rush to run off with Jordan, she had overlooked one crucial detail, her own stupidity. What do you need me to do? I asked. For now, gather everything, emails, documents, anything related to the refinancing and the deed. I'll handle the legal side. But, Lucas, if she was arrogant enough to brag about this to you, she's probably been running her mouth to other people too. She's digging her own grave. We just need to give her a push. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in days. The betrayal still stung, but knowing Vanessa's little scheme was already crumbling gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since that damn phone call. That night, I didn't waste a second. I pulled out the deed, the refinancing paperwork, every email exchange related to the apartment. Each document felt like a tiny victory, a reminder that Vanessa's recklessness would be her downfall. I stacked the papers neatly on the dining table, then leaned back and stared at them. This wasn't just about the apartment anymore. This was about taking my life back, about showing Vanessa that I wasn't the pathetic pushover she had taken me for. She thought she had one, thought she could skip off into the sunset with everything, laughing at my expense. But Vanessa had underestimated me, and she was about to realize just how big of a mistake that was. The drive back to the apartment felt surreal. I had spent the entire flight home carefully planning out what I'd say, how I'd handle the confrontation. Vanessa had no idea what was coming, and that thought brought me a strange sense of calm. For once, the scales weren't tipped in her favor. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel it. The place was different. Her presence lingered, but not in the familiar way. No, this was something else. It was like she had already claimed the space as her own, as if I had been erased from my own home. Then I heard her voice, light, animated, like nothing had happened. I turned the corner, and there she was, standing next to a man I could only assume was Jordan. He was younger than I expected, tall, smug, the kind of guy who carried himself like he had just won the lottery, the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've stolen something valuable. Vanessa spotted me first. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she forced it back into place. "Oh, Lucas, you're back," she said, her voice dripping with artificial cheer. Jordan turned to look at me, and I swear to God, the bastard smirked, like I was some minor inconvenience in his new life. Vanessa kept going, her tone careful, calculated. I didn't realize you'd be home so soon. Jordan and I were just discussing some plans for the apartment. Plans? For my apartment. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I stepped further into the room, set my bag down, and looked them both in the eye. Vanessa, I said, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Her fake smile wavered. Lucas, can it wait? We're kind of in the middle of something. No, I crossed my arms. It can't. Jordan glanced at her, then back at me. Look, man, he said, his tone condescending. I get that this is hard for you, but Vanessa and this doesn't concern you. I cut in, my eyes locked on her. Silence. Vanessa's confidence started to crack. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the deed, held it up, letting the silence stretch. Her expression tightened. What's that? She asked, her voice suddenly wary. It's the deed to this apartment, I said, my tone steady. The one that has my name on it. Only my name. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw panic. What are you talking about? She demanded, but there was no real conviction in her voice. I took a slow step forward. After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, remember? I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. So no, Vanessa, you didn't sell this apartment, because you can't sell something you don't own. Jordan's smirk vanished. He turned to her, his face twisting with confusion and irritation. Is this true? He demanded. Of course not, she snapped, but there was a waver in her voice. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. You're lying. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I just walked over and set the deed on the coffee table in front of them. Jordan snatched it up, scanning the document. His expression darkened. Vanessa, he said slowly, his voice tinged with suspicion. What is this? She sputtered, grasping for control. It's nothing. He's just trying to scare us. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Scare you? Vanessa, I'm just getting started. Her face drained of color. The sale? Void. The money? If you've already spent a single cent of it, you're looking at fraud charges. Her jaw clenched. You're bluffing. Am I? I took another step closer. Go ahead. Call your buyer. See how they feel about being scammed. Jordan recoiled, raising his hands. Whoa, fraud? Scammed? I didn't sign up for this. He turned back to Vanessa, his tone turning accusatory. You said this place was yours, that you'd already sold it. It is, she snapped, her desperation showing. I mean, it was supposed to be. Jordan shook his head, backing away. I'm not getting involved in this mess, he muttered. I crossed my arms, watching their fantasy crumble. Here's how this is going to work, I said, my voice cold and steady. Vanessa, you're going to pack your things and leave. You too, Jordan. You have no right to be here. And I'm done playing nice. Vanessa's hands balled into fists. You can't do this, she hissed, trembling with rage. This is our home. No, I said simply. It's my home. And you? You're not welcome in it anymore. Jordan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, throwing Vanessa one last look. Good luck, he said coldly. Then he was gone. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes blazing. You're going to regret this, she spat. I hadn't heard a single word from Vanessa. No smug texts, no taunts. She probably assumed I was too busy drowning in self-pity to fight back. Little did she know, I was gearing up for the battle of my life. My first call wasn't to her. It was to Chloe, my lawyer and an old college friend. Years ago, I'd helped her move into her first apartment, and she used to joke that if I ever needed her legal services, I'd get the family discount. Well, it was time to cash in. She picked up on the second ring. Lucas, you never call me during work hours. What's going on? I didn't waste time. I laid it all out. The phone call, the apartment, Vanessa's delusions of grandeur. By the time I was done, Chloe was quiet for a beat. Then she let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She sold the apartment? She repeated, like she couldn't believe her own ears. Lucas, Does she even know she can't legally do that? Apparently not, I said, barely suppressing the satisfaction in my voice. Chloe's tone turned serious. Okay, first things first. We need to notify the buyer that the sale is void. If she's already taken their money, that could open up a whole can of worms. Fraud charges, for starters. The word fraud sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. Vanessa thought she was so damn clever, pulling the rug out from under me. But in her rush to start her shiny new life, she'd overlooked one critical detail. What do you need from me? I asked. For now, gather everything. Emails, documents, anything related to the refinancing and the deed, she instructed. I'll handle the legal side. But Lucas, if she's already bragging about this to you, she's probably told other people too. She's digging her own grave. We just need to give her a little push. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in days. The betrayal still stung, but knowing that Vanessa's scheme was unraveling gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since that first phone call. That evening, I got to work. I pulled out every relevant document, the deed, the refinancing paperwork, email exchanges. Each piece of evidence felt like a victory, a reminder that Vanessa's arrogance would be her downfall. I stacked the papers neatly on the dining table and sat back, staring at them. This wasn't just about the apartment anymore. This was about taking my life back. Vanessa thought she'd won, thought she could walk away with everything while I licked my wounds. But she had underestimated me, and soon enough, she'd realized just how big of a mistake that was. The drive back to the apartment felt surreal. The entire flight, I'd been planning out what I'd say, how I'd handle the confrontation. Vanessa had no idea what was coming, and that thought gave me an eerie sense of calm. For once, the scales weren't tipped in her favor. The second I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The air was heavy with her presence, not in the familiar way, but like she'd claimed the space as her own, as if I had already been erased from it. I heard her voice before I saw her. She was in the living room, chatting animatedly with someone. When I rounded the corner, I stopped in my tracks. There she was, standing next to a man I could only assume was Jordan. He was younger than I expected, tall, smug, oozing the kind of confidence that only comes from believing you've won something valuable. Vanessa spotted me first. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she slapped it back on. "Oh, Lucas, you're back," she chirped, her tone dripping with forced cheer. Jordan turned to look at me, and I swear to God, the guy smirked, as if I were some minor inconvenience in his new life. "I didn't realize you'd be home so soon," Vanessa continued, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Jordan and I were just discussing some plans for the apartment." Plans? For my apartment? The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I calmly set my bag down and took a step closer. "Vanessa," I said, my voice firm, "we need to talk." Her smile wavered. "Lucas, can it wait? We're kind of in the middle of something." "No," I said, crossing my arms. "It can't." Jordan exhaled dramatically, shaking his head. "Look, man, I get that this is hard for you," he said, in that smug, condescending tone that made my fingers twitch. "But Vanessa and this doesn't concern you." I cut in, my eyes never leaving hers. The room went dead silent. Vanessa's confidence cracked as I reached into my bag and pulled out the deed. I held it up, letting the moment hang thick in the air. Her eyes flickered with something. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's the deed to this apartment," I said evenly. "The one that's in my name. Only my name." Her eyes widened. "There it is." "What are you talking about?" she demanded, though there was no conviction behind her words. I tilted my head slightly. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, remember?" I paused, watching the realization dawn on her face. "So no, Vanessa, you didn't sell this apartment, because you can't sell something you don't own." Jordan's smirk vanished. He turned to her, confusion and irritation written all over his face. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Of course not," she snapped, though her voice wavered. "He's lying." I didn't even bother arguing. I simply placed the deed on the coffee table and stepped back. Jordan snatched it up, scanning the document. With every second that passed, his face darkened. Finally, he turned to her, his voice laced with disbelief. "Vanessa, what is this?" She sputtered, her composure slipping. It's nothing. He's just trying to scare us." I let out a dry chuckle. "Scare you?" "Vanessa, I'm just getting started." She swallowed hard. "The sale you made? Void. The money you've taken? If you've spent a single cent of it, you're looking at fraud charges." Her face drained of color. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I countered, stepping closer. "Go ahead. Call your buyer. See how they feel about being scammed." Jordan took a step back, holding up his hands. Whoa, fraud? Scammed?" He turned to Vanessa, his tone sharp. "You told me this place was yours, that you'd already sold it." "It is mine," she insisted desperately. "I mean, it was supposed to be." Jordan shook his head, taking another step back. "I'm not getting involved in this mess." I crossed my arms, watching the cracks form in their little fantasy. "Here's how this is going to work," I said calmly. "Vanessa, you're going to pack your things and leave. You too, Jordan. You have no right to be here, and I'm done playing nice." "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "This is our home." "No," I said, my voice like steel. "This is my home, and you're not welcome in it anymore." Jordan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his coat and made for the door, pausing just long enough to glance back at Vanessa. "Good luck," he said coldly before walking out. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You're going to regret this," she spat. I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Vanessa, you're the one who's going to regret it." I met her glare without a shred of hesitation. "No, Vanessa, you're the one who's going to regret this." She seethed, then slammed the door behind her, leaving me standing alone in the apartment that, finally, was mine again. And this was just the beginning. Kicking Jordan out had been satisfying, but I knew the chaos wasn't over. Vanessa wasn't the type to just walk away quietly, but I couldn't help savoring the look on her so-called lover's face when he realized just how deep in the mess she had dragged him. His smug confidence shattered the second the truth hit him like a brick to the face. It wasn't just about fraud. It was about betrayal. He had trusted her, believed her lies when she told him the apartment was hers, that they could sell it, pocket the cash, and ride off into the sunset together. And now? Now he was standing in the middle of a disaster of her making. But let's rewind a little. When Jordan first walked into my apartment with Vanessa, he carried himself like he'd already won. Every move he made, every glance he threw my way, screamed, "I own this place now." I'd seen guys like him before, the kind who mistake arrogance for power, who think they've played the game better than anyone else. But the moment I dropped the ownership documents on the table, his confidence wavered. At first, just a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Then, tight lips as he read line after line. And finally, when he looked up at me, all that cocky bravado was gone. In its place, panic. "Vanessa," his voice was low, tense. "What is this?" Vanessa, as always, tried to bluff her way through. "It's nothing, Jordan. He's just trying to scare us. Don't fall for it." But Jordan wasn't buying her cheap tricks anymore. He might not have been the sharpest guy, but even he wasn't dumb enough to ignore official documents, my calm demeanor, and the sheer panic creeping into Vanessa's voice. "You told me this apartment was yours, that it was already sold. Was that a lie too?" Vanessa shot me a hateful look, as if this was somehow my fault. "It's not a lie," she snapped, though her voice wavered. I didn't know the paperwork was still under his name, okay? It's a technicality." "A technicality?" Jordan's expression darkened. He held up the contract. "This literally says he owns the place. This isn't a small mistake, Vanessa. This is fraud." That word fraud hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. Vanessa's face drained of color. She turned to me, eyes narrowing. "You planned this, didn't you? You knew I'd try to sell the place and just waited to humiliate me." I shrugged. "You give me too much credit, Vanessa. I didn't plan a damn thing. You did this to yourself." Jordan exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face as if trying to process the absolute train wreck unfolding around him. His perfect little fantasy had gone up in flames. "I'm out," he suddenly said, stepping away from Vanessa. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean, out?" "I mean, I'm done with this circus, His voice was sharp, cold. "This isn't what I signed up for. You lied to me, and now it's your problem." He grabbed his coat, his movements clipped and decisive. "Jordan, wait. We can fix this. Just give me a chance." He didn't even look back. The door slammed behind him, leaving her standing there, stunned and desperate. She turned to me, eyes burning with fury. "Are you happy?" she hissed. "You ruined everything." I crossed my arms, unfazed. "No, Vanessa. You ruined everything. You lied. You manipulated, and now you're facing the consequences. Maybe it's time you learn what it's like to actually take responsibility for once." Her fists clenched even tighter, but she had no comeback. Instead, she spun on her heel and disappeared into the bedroom. That night, her rage was practically vibrating through the walls. I heard her pacing, throwing things, muttering to herself, but I didn't care. I'd already won this round, and we both knew it. About an hour later, she emerged, dragging a suitcase behind her. "You think you've won?" Her voice was full of venom and bitterness. I barely held back a smirk. "Vanessa, this isn't a game. It's my life. You're the one who turned it into a damn soap opera." She spat a few more insults, but eventually, she walked out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. And then silence. Real, pure, priceless silence. I leaned back on the couch and, for the first time in a long time, I could actually breathe. Vanessa thought I'd always be her naive, spineless husband, but she was wrong. And now? Now she knew it. Vanessa's isolation was driving her to desperation, and honestly, it was a beautiful thing to witness from a safe distance. Chloe, ever the professional, kept me updated on the legal side of things. "She's panicking," she told me over the phone one afternoon. "The buyer isn't pressing charges, but they're furious. Vanessa's burned bridges she can't rebuild. And the divorce? She's got no leverage, Lucas. You're walking away clean." Hearing that felt like shedding a weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying. For years, I had been trapped in a marriage where I was constantly doubted, dismissed, and treated like an afterthought. And now? Now I was breaking free. Of course, Vanessa had to take one last pathetic stab at stalling. When the divorce papers landed in her inbox, she sent back a long-winded email full of excuses, half-hearted apologies, and a desperate attempt to paint herself as the victim. She claimed she'd acted out of fear, that she felt neglected in our marriage, that things hadn't been as black and white as I thought. It was almost funny, her suddenly finding self-awareness now that she had no other options. The best part? Chloe had everything locked down airtight. Vanessa could whine, stall, and send all the guilt trip emails she wanted, but she couldn't delay the inevitable. A few weeks later, she finally signed the damn papers. And just like that, it was over. The day the divorce was finalized, I stood in the middle of my apartment, and let out a slow breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. The space felt different, lighter, freer, like every ounce of negativity she had dumped in here had finally been purged. That evening, Ethan came over again, this time with takeout and another bottle of bourbon. "So, it's official?" he asked, sinking into the couch. I poured us both a glass and nodded. "It's official." He raised his glass with a grin. "To freedom." I smirked, clinking my glass against his. To freedom. The days that followed were full of small victories. I continued reclaiming the apartment, turning it into a place that actually reflected me, not some warped compromise that catered to Vanessa's ridiculous taste. The gaming setup she had constantly complained about, front and center in the living room. The boring artwork I loved, back on the walls where it belonged. And the couch? Gone. I bought a new one, something that felt mine, not ours. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without walking on eggshells, without trying to please someone who never actually appreciated me. I was living for myself now, and it felt damn good. One evening, as I was sorting through old paperwork, I came across a photo of Vanessa and me. It was from the early days of our marriage, back when things still felt hopeful, when I still believed in the version of her she wanted me to see. We were smiling, arms around each other, looking like a couple who had it all figured out. I stared at the photo for a long moment. There had been good times, sure, but they were buried under years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. That picture was nothing more than a snapshot of a moment that no longer existed, a version of my life that had ended long before I realized it had. I slipped the photo into an envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. I wasn't ready to throw it out just yet, but I also didn't need it staring me in the face. It was a piece of my past, but it sure as hell didn't define me. This apartment had become more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of my resilience. I'd fought for it, stood my ground, and won. It reminded me that I was capable of reclaiming not just my home, but my life. In the weeks that followed, I started thinking about what came next. The divorce had closed one chapter, but it also opened the door to endless possibilities. I didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but one thing was certain: it would be on my terms. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from Vanessa, free from her lies, free from the weight of a marriage that had been suffocating me for far too long. That night, I sank into my newly purchased couch, a glass of bourbon in hand, and looked out over the city. The lights twinkled in the distance, steady and unbothered, just like I felt. This was my life now, simple, peaceful, and entirely mine. I even splurged on a new couch, a sleek, modern piece that fit perfectly with the new energy of the place. But the transformation wasn't just about furniture. It was something deeper. Every change I made felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The apartment was no longer a war zone of compromise and resentment. It was mine, a sanctuary that radiated warmth, freedom, and possibility. One evening, while reorganizing a closet, I came across a box of old photos. Tucked among them was one of Vanessa and me from the early days, back when I still believed in the illusion. We were smiling, arms around each other, looking like a couple who had it all figured out. I stared at it for a long moment. It was strange seeing a version of myself that felt so distant, like looking at a stranger. Back then, I thought I understood love. I thought I knew what a real partnership was. But hindsight has a way of stripping away the bullshit. I slid the photo into an envelope and shoved it to the back of the closet. I wasn't ready to throw it away just yet, but I also didn't need it staring me in the face. That part of my life, as painful as it had been, shaped me. This wasn't about clinging to the past. It was about acknowledging it and using it as proof of how far I'd come. With the apartment finally feeling like home, I turned my focus toward the future. For years, I had been so tangled up in trying to hold my marriage together that I let my own dreams fall to the side. But now, with nothing holding me back, the possibilities felt endless. I started setting goals. Personal, professional, hell, even recreational. I signed up for a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during the years I spent walking on eggshells around Vanessa. And through it all, Ethan was there. One evening, we sat on the balcony, bourbon in hand, talking about everything and nothing. "You know," he said, raising his glass, "I've gotta say, man, you're glowing. Single life suits you." I laughed, taking a sip. "It's not about being single," I said. "It's about being free. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." Ethan smirked. "To freedom." "To freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. The divorce hadn't just ended my marriage. It had opened the door to something new. The resentment, the self-doubt, the constant feeling of being trapped, gone. Replaced by a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. But the biggest change? It wasn't the apartment. It wasn't the hobbies or the new couch. It was me. I had always thought of myself as the kind of guy who avoided confrontation, who kept the peace no matter what. But this experience proved something I never realized. I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. Vanessa had underestimated me. She thought she could bulldoze her way through my life, take everything, and leave me scrambling in the wreckage. But she was wrong. Her arrogance was her downfall. And my quiet resilience? That was my victory. One day, while scrolling through emails, I saw a message from her. Subject: "Can we talk?" I didn't even open it. Whatever she had to say didn't matter. My focus was forward, not back. Life didn't change overnight. But little by little, I built something real. The apartment became a haven, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The friendships I rekindled reminded me of the importance of surrounding myself with real people, people who actually cared. And most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. For too long, I had second-guessed my instincts, doubted my worth, and let someone else's needs overshadow my own. But now, I knew better. I knew what I deserved, and I wasn't willing to settle for anything less. The night I realized I had truly moved on was quiet and unremarkable in the best way. I was sitting on my new couch, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights flicker outside my window. The apartment was warm, inviting, a true reflection of who I was. And I thought back to that phone call, to Vanessa's arrogance, the condescension, the smug certainty that she'd won. I couldn't help but smile. She thought she was walking away with everything, but in the end, she left with nothing. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a life I never knew I could have, one filled with possibility, peace, and the freedom to be exactly who I was meant to be. And for the first time in years, I was truly, completely free.